We will be answering question 1 to 7 within these 10 minutes, evaluating our film opening, How My Sister Died. One way in which we challenge the horror genre conventions is by using the same shot twice, which is not considered common in comparison to the film genre openings which we researched during pre-production, such as The Ring, Mama, Cabin in the Woods, Insidious, and The Grudge. The mid-shot of Mariana in a bathtub contained the protagonist submerged underwater with a voiceover tracking her thoughts, while an image of the antagonist emerged on screen. In the last shot of the film opening, as editors, we challenged the typical conventions of not having the same shot in an opening, as we ended the film opening with an identical shot. The reason of which Mariana was in the bathtub, both in the beginning of the scene and at the end, is because she was reminiscing of what had happened to her the day before. This challenged horror film conventions, as typically in a horror film everything that occurs happens in real time. However, ours was from the previous day. In The Ring, the events within the film all occurred in real time during the process of the film. However, we challenged this convention and based our film opening on the day before. As a production team, we also decided to use traditional conventions from films like The Grudge. We used the same concept of the supernatural antagonist portrayed in The Grudge. Alike to the antagonist in The Grudge, our antagonist appeared with the same visual aspects, as although the audience were aware that the antagonist was present, the protagonist was unaware. This helped to play a part in using traditional conventions of the audience knowing what is occurring, yet the protagonist appears to be completely unaware with the circumstances. We originally wanted to use makeup and costume from The Ring. However, during production we came to the conclusion that it would be more specific to our genre if we combined the makeup and costume from the antagonist in both The Ring and The Grudge. Although we intentionally were going to use a traditional convention, this soon became a challenging convention where we combined our two antagonists' makeup. We were inspired by Samara from The Ring and therefore set out to have our makeup like hers. The makeup played a big part towards creating the genre of horror film, as it helped in the process of scaring the audience. In order to make sure that our antagonist appeared as a horror character, we used white face paint, grey and black eyeshadow, and black pencil around the eyes in order to make it appear that our character had been dead. The reason of which our character had a pale face yet dark features was to make sure it was clear to the audience that the antagonist was drowned and therefore her skin colour looked washed and drained. Her hair was knotty and messy, yet she still had dark features to keep the audience engaged. For the setting, we used a traditional convention. The idea to film in the woods initially came from the Cabin in the Woods. We received the idea of using the Cabin in the Woods once our group discussed their favourite, most suspenseful horror films due to the setting. We concluded that the woods would be the most specific setting for our horror film opening. The reason we were so attracted to the idea of our setting being in the woods was because the woods appear to be an unknown setting where anything is possible because they are so hidden away. The woods helped our film opening create suspense and horror, as well as assisting us through control of lighting because of the tall trees which blocked out most of the sunlight. This played a huge part in creating a gloomy atmosphere for opening. We challenged this traditional idea, as typically you would expect something bad to occur in the woods, whereas we decided to counteract that and reverse the idea, but instead having the woods as a pathway for spookier scenes later in the opening.
The social group which we portrayed would be sisters, as the antagonist and protagonist are sisters. This wouldn't have been known to the audience unless we had a voiceover explaining how the two are related. If we were to reproduce our film opening, we would have included more filmed shots which makes the two characters appear related without having to use a voiceover. The concept of two sisters was developed by the production team, and this was not initially part of our planning and research. However, we incorporated it with our target audience research. Also, the fact that they are both females appeals to the horror movie genre, as the majority of the protagonists are female, such as Insidious, Mama, and The Ring. The age of the two girls is also a very important feature and portrays a social group of teenage girls. We made the protagonist seem very innocent with the use of her voice. She sounded a lot younger than the age she was playing, and this gave the effect that she never grew up from the the time her sister actually died, which was 3 years prior to the film's setting. At the time of her death, the antagonist Janet was 19 years old and her sister was 16. Because she died at the age of 19, Janet had not grown and still looked like a 19-year-old, and 3 years later, Megan was the same age as Janet at the time of her death. However, Megan is still very young and has the innocence, vulnerability, and naivety of a 16-year-old because she suffered at a very traumatic experience at that age. The kind of media institution which would distribute our product would be New Line Cinema and Blumhouse Productions. This is because the production team did a lot on in-depth research on the kind of institutions we would use, and New Line Cinema is very successful for creating popular horror movie franchises, which means that it would be realistic if they were to ever distribute our media product. Blumhouse Productions is an independent production company. However, it has produced many films of the horror genre, such as Insidious, which we used in our research, which has similar connotations to our own film opening, and Paranormal Activity, which we briefly looked at for inspiration but didn't actually use it for in-depth research.
As a production team, we had to be specific on our film opening genre in order to attract the right audience. We refrained from using any blood or gore in order to lower our target audience age. For example, the specific scene of the antagonist appearing behind the protagonist could have been very gory, as we could have had the antagonist attack the protagonist. However, we refrained from doing this so that it was more suitable for the people of the age of 16. Our target audience was 16 and above purely because our protagonist and antagonist were both teenagers themselves, and therefore this made it easier for our audience to be able to relate to the characters of the same age. The antagonist was 19 when she died, and therefore stayed that age. However, our protagonist was 16 when her sister died, but was 19 in the process of the film. Although our protagonist was 19, she acted and appeared as a 16-year-old to portray that she had never got over her sister's death, and mentally remained the same age. We showed this through her voiceover, where her voice appeared to be mellow and low and very childlike, as well as a costume that she wore, which was simple and didn't make much of a statement, as many 19-year-old outfits would today. Our target audience also consisted of males, as our protagonist and antagonist were both females. It attracted males in particular towards our media product. Although neither of our characters from our media product were provocative, alike to some characters in The Cabin in the Woods, this enabled us to apart from the traditional conventions of a horror film.
During the voiceover, we directly addressed the audience because we wanted for it to appear as if we was telling a story, and an interesting way to show this would be to engage the audience. Another way of attracting the audience was adjusting volume settings on the non-diegetic soundtrack. We raised the volume at certain points where a very high-pitched sound was made, which had somewhat of a shocking and surprising effect. Furthermore, we distorted whispers, which made the audience want to pay more attention to what was being said, although it was not our own original recording. We also attracted the audience visually by having the antagonist appear early on the opening and then quickly disappearing, which kept the audience wondering what happened to her and where she went, keeping the audience genuinely intrigued by the character. Throughout the post-production, we advanced our editing knowledge and skills using the editing software Final Cut Pro. We also attempted to make sure of another Apple software known as GarageBand, but we did not actually use it. When coming to the camera work, we used the DSLR Nikon D321, and it was very clear and helpful. Furthermore, we made use of YouTube when coming to adding sections of Final Cut Pro, which we may have needed help in.
In our prelim task, the camera was tilted as well as being out of focus multiple times. This was shown in the scene of Mariana and Amber sitting on the table. The camera was at an angle throughout the scene. The sound was of bad quality as it could not be heard clearly, as when both Amber and Mariana spoke, only snippets of the speech could be heard. The editing was poor as the shots did not flow consistently throughout the task. For example, there was a 5-second break between the scene of Mariana coming out of the closet and her sitting down at the table. To ensure that the camera was not tilted within our film opening, we used a tripod to keep the camera shot steady. In the specific scene of the protagonist walking through the woods and the antagonist appearing behind a tree, a tripod was used to ensure that the shot was clear and not at an angle. To ensure that the camera in the scene was focused beforehand, we focused the camera before filming. This was shown in the scene of Mariana sitting up in the bathtub at the end of the film opening. we ensured the camera lens was pre-focused so that the shot was clear. However, in the prelim task, we focused the camera as we were filming the scene. As a production team, to ensure that the sound quality was clear, we pre-recorded our voiceover on a smartphone in quiet rooms and had the phone the right distance away from the person talking in order for the voiceover to be understandable. As editors, we spent a significant amount of time on editing our film opening to ensure that our scenes flowed harmoniously. We used transitions on Final Cut Pro to ensure that our scenes circulated throughout the film opening. During the editing process, we also used filters for our opening. This helped improve our lighting to ensure that there was a constant dull lighting throughout the film opening. This helped us sustain our film within the horror genre.